Hi everyone and welcome to another episode of our series in which I will show you how to send messages. Let's get started by opening the activitychat.xml file and let's change the default layout to a linear layout. Let's set the orientation to vertical, and inside this linear layout let's create a recycler view which will be match parent and 0dp. Let's also set the weight to 1. Let's also assign in an ID which will be simply recycler view. Let's also set the layout manager to a linear layout manager. Let's move this up, and now let's create another layout, a linear layout, which will be match parent and wrap content. Let's also assign in the orientation, which will be this time horizontal. Inside this linear layout, let's add an edit text, which will be 0dp and wrap content. Let's also assign the weight to 1. Let's assign the ID to simply edit text and the hint to type a message. Let's assign the padding start, and let's say it will be 8dp. Let's also assign the input type, which will be simply text. Let's also add a button, which will be wrap content, and wrap content will assign an ID simply button and the text, which will be simply send. You can extract these strings in a resource file, but I'll let you guys finish this. Now let's see a preview of what we have done so far. And as you can see, it looks pretty good. So that's it with this layout. Now let's get back to our chat activity and let's define our database root reference as a global variable. And let's instantiate it in our onCreate function. And we have root ref, which is equal Firebase Firestore get instance. Now let's get the data that is coming from the intent. If you remember, we have added as extra data the from user object and the to user object, which is this. So let's do this. We have val from user, which is intent extra get from user, and let's cast now this object to a user object, and let's do this import. Let's also get now the corresponding UID, which is from UID is equal from user UID. Let's get now the rooms. If you remember, this variable is of type map, and we define it as a var because we'll change its value later, and it's from user rooms. Let's do this also for the other user object, and we have val to user, which is intent extras get the to user as user object as well, and we have val to UID, which is to user UID, and the var to rooms, which is to user rooms. Let's also get the room ID, which is this. And we have var room ID intent extras get the room ID, and let's cast it to a string. Now let's create an if statement. If room ID is equal to no room ID, which means when we are coming from the contacts activity, we have no room ID yet. So if we have no room ID, we need to generate one. Shortly, when we want to send a message and there is no room that is already created, no chat room between two users, we need to create one. So we have room ID, which is equal to root ref collections of messages, and we call document ID. This document ID is actually the room ID. Let's create now another check. If our from rooms isn't equal to null, let's loop through this map. For key underscore in from rooms, let's create now another check. If two rooms isn't equal to null, and if toRoom contains this key, let's assign this key to our room ID. Now, let's write the code that actually sends the message. Now, let's set onClickListener on our button, and let's check if the FromRooms map is null. And if it is null, let's instantiate it. Now, let's put in this FromRooms map the room ID as a key and as a value the boolean true. And now let's update our FromUser object with this map. And now let's write this updated user object to the database. And we have root_ref, collections of users, document from UID, and let's set this user object and pass as the second parameter set options merge. Now let's update the toUser object also in two more locations. And we have root_ref, collections of contacts, document from UID, collections of user contacts, document toUID, and set our toUser object and also pass set options match. And the last one is root_ref, collections of rooms, document from UID, collection user rooms, document room ID this time, and set the toUser object and also pass set options match. Let's do this also for the second map. Now let's check if the toRooms map is null, and if it is null, let's instantiate it. Now let's add to this map our room ID and let's update our toUser object. Now let's add this user object to the database by calling collection of users, document toUID, and then set our toUser object. Now let's add the FromUser and to other places. Collection of contacts, document toUID, collections of user contacts, document from UID, and set our FromUser object. And the last one is collection of rooms, document toUID, collections of user rooms, document room ID, and set our FromUser object. There is one more thing that we need to do, is to create a message and add it to the database. And for that, let's create a new model class and simply call it message. And we have class message. Let's increase this a little bit, and we'll use three fields if you remember. The first one is the message text, which is of type string. The second one is the from UID, which is also of type string. And the last one is a server timestamp, and for that we need to use an annotation. And we need to use val, let's call it send at, which is of type date, from java.util package. And that's it with this model class. Now let's get back to our chat activity and let's get the text message from our edit text, and let's convert it to string. Now let's create an object of message class, and let's pass the first argument the text message and the second the from UID. And now let's add this object to the database, and we have root_ref, collections of messages, document room ID, collections of room messages, and we pass the message object as an argument. And now is the time to test our app to see how our messages are added to the database. Before testing, we need to make a little change. So let's cut these two lines of code and let's paste them over here. And let's cut these 2 lines of code and let's paste them over here. And also let's clear our edit text. I have my emulator running, and let's open our app. Let's open our contacts activity and let's start a conversation with the second user. And let's say hi. Let's open our database to see if our messages were successfully added. Let's refresh this. And as you can see, our VAU and so on is added as a room to the first user as well to the second user. Let's also check if it's added to the contacts, user contacts, and is successfully added. And for the second one, also works. Let's also check our rooms, and each user, as you can see, has a room, and the other one has also the same room. Let's also check the messages. There is a single chat room and there is a single message, which is hi. So that's it for this part. In the next part, I will show you how to display the messages and the chat rooms. So hope you guys enjoy it. Don't forget to subscribe and see you in the next video.